Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have a guest. This is the author, Janet Wertman. Care to wave to my imaginary BookTube friends? And we are here. Janet Wertman, of course, has a new book that you should all buy, Nothing Proved. This is book one in a new trilogy. She is the author of a previous trilogy about the Seymour family, uh, intimately entwined with Tudor history. Not only because Jane Seymour was one of King Henry VIII's wives, but also because she was the mother of his only legitimate male heir, who then became King of England. This this is the competition. This is another child of Henry VIII by Anne Boleyn, and this is the youth and childhood of young princess and then non-princess and then princess again, Elizabeth. Uh,
Lady, princess, it's all.
and would you care to tell our viewers where the title comes from? You see those words right down there, and then there's the title, Nothing Proved.
It comes from a poem that she wrote. And then when they took her pen and paper away because they didn't like the poem, she took a diamond and scratched it on a window. Much suspected by me, nothing proved can be, quoth Elizabeth, prisoner. So it comes right from there.
And that brings us to a subject that all of 4chan has wanted to talk about. Why was she suspected? Why was she imprisoned? It's time for you and me to talk about Wyatt's rebellion.
Yes,
That is
she
the heart of
was
the book.
one of the hearts of the book. She was suspected of a lot of things over and over. Nothing could be proved against her over and over. So
Now,
that,
should we set the scene? It's 1554, and Elizabeth's half sister Mary, known infamously to history as Bloody Mary, is on the throne. And Mary is a revanchist Catholic. She is not interested in the Reformed Church. She wants to bring England back to the old ways, and has also agreed to marry a foreigner, to marry Philip of Spain, to marry a Habsburg. And that has caused, I know, I know that only two people are going to understand that. That has caused a lot of trouble, a lot of tension, a lot of talk, and a rebellion. Thomas Wyatt the Younger, the son of the famous poet, uh, is
which
part
only
of,
made things worse for her, but
well, yes, because his father had written love poems to Anne Boleyn, uh, and narrowly escaped dying, right alongside a whole bunch of other people, narrowly escaped being killed by Henry VIII. And Elizabeth is in confinement. Yes, when she writes your title, she's at Woodstock Manor, and she is not free to leave.
no, but she was released from the tower, so she is in lesser confinement and less danger than she had been.
So
And
the subject that I wanted to talk about, one of the subjects that I wanted to talk about was uh, how you go about digging into researching a book like this. I recently made a video on a reading project. That's basically what this starts with, right? It, it has to start with a reading project. You have to line up your ducks.
so many books. Yeah. It is not easy to find a lot of evidence, a lot of talk. There are a few things, and those were kind of the guideposts that I walked in between. Um, we know that she had a message from Thomas Wyatt, letting her know that she might want to move away from London because of strangers in the area. Um, and she basically just responded kind of cryptically, um, thank him for his concern, let him know I will do as I have cause. Didn't put it in writing, rather delivered it orally. We know that when she was, when they wanted to bring her back to court, she got sick. And we know she was quite sick because they forced her to come back to court to face the music. And she insisted on riding in January with her litter open so that the people could see how sick she looked. We know that she was questioned at the Tower and confronted with James Croft, who had
Another
come
conspirator.
to warn her at some point. We know that the captain of her security, William Saintlow, was brave and stout when he basically said, "You're all idiots. No, she's innocent." And that's kind of it. We know that she almost moved to Donington in response, and we know that there were guns in Donington. But okay, there's the story. That's what we know. Oh, we
Oh,
also know.
you say guns, you could also say cannon, right? There was weaponry at Donington Castle enough to overthrow a government. And your precious Elizabeth
Yes.
almost went there.
So every nobleman was under an obligation to provide arms to the king. They were under an obligation to have the arms and armory and men to help the monarch in their time of need. So Donington, yes, was outfitted with weaponry.
So this, in full disclosure, this video was originally going to be a Janet Wertman expose of the type that 4chan and 8chan have been clamoring for. But my agents could not dig up any dirt on Janet Wertman. Mostly, I suppose, because all of it was burned in a house fire that cost you everything but the clothes you stood up in. So instead, I'm going to go after your girlfriend. So you did this research, you did this reading project. Did you start that research from the a priori assumption that Elizabeth was innocent?
Yes. Well, here's the thing. My belief as to Elizabeth's innocence in this situation is molded by how she dealt with Mary, Queen of Scots later on. She gave Mary, Queen of Scots, the benefit of the doubt
Oh,
and well, up until Mary, Queen of Scots, put her name, her signature to rebellion. She just kept on saying, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it," because she knew how easy it was to, I don't want to say approve. I mean, clearly she would have been excited about the rebellion being successful, but she didn't condone it. And she gave that same grace to Mary, Queen of Scots, saying, well, of course she would welcome regime change, but she didn't condone it. And so that was the line that I think was drawn here.
I hadn't ever thought of that. That's true, isn't it? She gave Mary, Queen of Scots, every benefit of the doubt. So you think there's a line between that and how she herself was treated?
Yes, I absolutely do. I see her time in Woodstock. I see her making a couple of incorrect assumptions about Mary's time in Woodstock. Not real. I mean, when you look at Elizabeth's time in Woodstock, she was hanging her head against the wall, tired of being confined after relatively not all that long. But Mary, Queen of Scots, it was 20 years, and Elizabeth didn't think of how much more frustrated Mary might have been after 20 years. But I think that it all, I think I see a direct link between her time in Woodstock and her imprisonment of Mary.
But when your precious Elizabeth was first confronted by the council, they found reason to commit her to the Tower. She had friends on that council, didn't she? She certainly had people on that council who knew that she had powerful friends in the country. They still thought, do you think they were doing that to please Mary?
She had people who hated her. The people, okay, Mary had 55 men on her council. Mary just like, okay, you can be on my council and you can be on my council. Everybody was on Mary's council. And because the council was so big, the only people that Mary listened to were Gardiner, who hated Elizabeth, and the Spanish ambassador, who hated Elizabeth. The two of them wanted Elizabeth to die. So, yes, Elizabeth was imprisoned.
I'm the same way with my own Imperial Council. I just invite everybody, so I don't know how many of them are plotting against me. I have no idea. At any one time, I have no idea what cabals are forming and dissolving. So getting back to the reading project thing, Elizabeth is well chronicled, right? I mean, there are thousands of books. Did those largely?
Here's another one.
I know they're everywhere. And what would be like, for instance, when you rehearse the idea of where she is, what she knew, and what she committed to paper, or even what she committed to verbal messages, you are pretty much giving a summary of everything that we know. Did that brevity remove the need for transcontinental plane tickets? Did you, I mean, is there any reason, if you're writing a novel like this about such a well-known character, well-documented character, is there any reason to go to the archives? Any archives? It's, I mean, especially for the purposes of fiction, as opposed to, I don't know, a biography, although you don't, in this novel, you don't stray far from what we know and can prove. So
I'm a rule follower. What can I say?
it's really good. All of those who are on the fence, it's really good. And I guarantee you, to the extent that I can, that the next two books will also be really good. But what did the shape of that preparation take? I assume it did not take the form of scouring Warwickshire for original records or anything like that. It's
Well, I did kind of research for 40 years. Yeah.
yeah.
So there's that. I've been reading about this and researching, and no, I didn't go like a little bit of archive digging, but not actually there. I mean, I love this stuff. So
But okay, so you've been deeply involved in this for a long time. Those of you who don't know, Janet Wertman is well known in Tudor circles. uh, uh, Popular speaker, popular event guest, and whatnot. Uh, Even so, with all of that research, with all of that reading, there had to be a moment when you were contemplating this book when you had to decide, okay, well, given all of that, who is my Elizabeth? Who is my Elizabeth going to be? Yeah, right? I mean, when we're talking about something 500, 600 years ago, you could have all the documentation in the world. The person can still be elusive. And your Elizabeth is not elusive. She comes off like a three-dimensional human being. So you had to decide a lot of that, right? Or no?
yes, I did. Just part of the process. It is so like the first draft through is just the bare bones story, and then gradually adding in, and then writing books 2 and 3 to then go back and figure out. I mean, this whole thing about noticing the parallel with Mary Queen of Scots, it's like, yes, you're going to see some of this stuff come up again. A lot of the stuff in this book is not standalone. I mean, it's perfectly standalone. You read it as a standalone, but you're going to see some echoes later on, and that also is
This does work as a standalone. It is book one, you can see there, but it does work as a standalone story of a young woman who could have stepped into deadly peril at any minute of any day for years and didn't. That's a pretty gripping story. But what about delineating the personalities of her co-conspirators? I'm sorry, they weren't her co-conspirators. No, no. Oh no.
don't you better be careful. I had the French ambassador do the same thing.
Yes, plenty of people did the same thing. I wonder why. I have the somewhat unpopular view of saying that no one ever got their bottom on the English throne innocently. And whenever I say that, people always mention not young Elizabeth, but Jane Grey. And I tell them, no, absolutely, there is no innocent in Jane Grey. No, or nor in any of the Grey family. Every one of them are traitors to their eye teeth. But the same could possibly be said of some of the other people in on Wyatt's rebellion. You had to decide who all of them would be, right? From Wyatt all the way down,
Yes, I
including
did.
my own guy, including Nicholas Throckmorton. You had to decide, how guilty is Nicholas Throckmorton? How guilty are any of the Throckmortons of Warwickshire?
Nicholas Throckmorton had to be there because remember, he also delivers the ring and he shows up in book two. That was
He
a
gets the
lot of,
culminating scene in the book. He's the one who rides up and tells Elizabeth that she's queen.
right?
Uh, but but I mean, he shows up throughout the. I don't mean to center on the Throckmortons. I very much. I have spent time at Coton Court. I know the family really well. Uh, I know the history of the family really well. But I don't mean to center on just him. It could be anybody. You had to come, like for instance, we have uh Hollingshed, right? We have. Is it Hollingshed? Who is it that? What is the English history that gives the depositions basically of these men as they were being tried? Like Croc,
Um,
we get almost some of his words as they occur. We definitely get words from Nicholas Throckmorton where he just puts his accusers to shame, just puts them to shame. Gets a not guilty verdict from a rigged two-year
who
jury. I know
heard
and when they knew what was coming, the jurors had to know that if they did this, they would be punished for it, and they were punished for it.
it?
They did it anyway because I guess their consciences wouldn't allow it. I don't know, but you had to basically find each one of these men, right?
Yep.
Somehow or other.
Yes.
At what point do you reach the tipping?
Again, 40 years.
But 40 years is for the facts. Is there ever any temptation once the facts have reached a critical mass and you think, all right, well, I know as much about Nicholas Bedingfield as I'm ever going to know. Now I need to make a person for fiction. Is there ever any temptation to let, I don't know, your greengrocer or your second cousin once removed bleed onto the page and help out with that? Does your Elizabeth resemble anybody that you know?
Not really.
No, no. One of my favorite authors said once that I always use the people in my life for my own characters, but I make sure to mince them first. You wouldn't recognize a pig and a sausage.
But that's the point. I mean, you chop it all up and you take like a little bit of thing here and a little bit of thing there. So yes, that's absolutely everyone. But is it, you can't put them back in that same kind of sitting there with the glue and try to piece it all together.
Now, what about the moral dimension? I noticed in the Seymour books and in this book that you have something of a marked aversion to villains, just simple villains. You just don't seem to want to find them anywhere. Instead, you're all about motivation.
Yeah, I
But that is certainly not the story.
Gardner is close. I come close to
Gardner is
Gardner
hard to
as
like.
a
Well, he's hard to like
pure,
anyway.
no redeeming qualities villain. I come
Stephen Gardner
close
is
to
hard
that.
to like. It's true. But even there, even with him, there's a humanity there that, for instance, well, to use the obvious example that's just sitting there, that he very much lacks in the Wolf Hall books by Hilary Mantel. He has almost no humanity there. He's more human in your books. Uh, but
High praise indeed.
that aversion to just straight up good guys and bad guys, that can't have been, unless I'm estimating wrong, that was not a feature of the historical fiction that you read as a young girl yourself. It was full of the
Okay,
bad guys and good guys. That fiction.
here's the thing. Here's the thing that I was a lawyer for 15 years, which I don't like to talk about very much because people always kind of hold that against me. But the point is, there are multiple sides to every story, and everyone is the hero in his or her own story. And so there always is some sort of motivation. So
So
even with Gardner, not Richard Rich. Let's take him right off the table.
let's
No,
take
not
Richard Rich
there.
right off the table. Yes. Yes. Even Gardner, there's something. Richard Rich, there's nothing there at all. Just a climbing sociopath. Uh, whereas we certainly couldn't say that about your precious Elizabeth. Oh no. There is, there is no such thing as an innocent daughter of a king.
She knew about she knew about the rebellion. I was clear that she knew about the rebellion. She just didn't condone it. Yeah, and all of those. Yeah, there were a few of those. She knew when Kat was taking all the pamphlets and the brochures. She's sitting there going, "Why didn't you burn them?"
so,
She just
so
left them there.
your view of the circumstance is that Elizabeth was smart enough to know that it would have been suicide to write something.
Yes,
That would just have been, she
absolutely.
was too closely watched. That would have been suicide.
Yes.
And interestingly, your point is that Mary, Queen of Scots, knew that too, but after 20 years, who the hell cares? I'm gonna do it anyway. I'm gonna try anyway. That's
Mary Queen
fascinating.
of Scots. Mary Queen of Scots did not have the political savvy, did not have the deep understanding of power. She had a warped understanding of power coming from the French court and kind of shielded from a lot of that stuff. Elizabeth really kind of saw how things worked and how people would turn against you. Mary did not quite as much. Mary was naive. Mary looked to men to save her, and Elizabeth could only ever rely on herself. So
Hmm.
yes, I think that Mary Stuart was not the brightest bulb when she committed a bunch of stuff to paper.
Hmm. But your young Elizabeth is at least tentatively relying on a couple of people.
Yes,
Uh,
she is.
I mean, William Cecil, for instance, she's starting to realize that there are good men out there.
She, it was during this period of her life, she learned who she could trust and that she assembled around. And basically, at this point in her life, anyone who was nice to her was someone she could trust. Largely with obvious exceptions here and there, but and she needed to learn that. So as she's growing up and people are being everywhere are being absolutely terrible to her, she was willing to befriend anyone, and she gradually had to figure out what those lines were as she went through.
So you would say, would you say that that fact that women who were nice to her got her loyalty, would you say that explains her exaggerated reaction if those women in the future betrayed her or did something she saw as a betrayal? She could have an exaggerated reaction. It wasn't, she could
Oh,
have
I'm
two
going to,
explosions of temper down the line with
yes,
some of those women. Some of the women that she's trusting here, I don't want to spoil any of the upcoming books, but she could have a Tudor explosion of temper if a woman that she had trusted at this time in her life. You'd say that's where it
yes,
comes from?
it comes from, oh yeah, well, and also the direct. I'm assuming you're talking about Lettice Malice in book two. And I that is going to be seen and built up much more in book two. At this point, I just wanted to make it clear how far that relationship did go back. That that went back. I mean, there were a couple. I mean, all of a sudden in this book, my head exploded when I realized that I could put Amy Robsart Dudley and T. Snallis in the same room at the same time with Elizabeth. That was just okay. I am doing this right now. This has to be done. So
But
yes, that
so the same answer will apply to the next book, for instance. The 40 years answer will largely apply to the next book. You have a much the next book in the story won't be a teenage girl in confinement. It will be by necessity a much bigger story.
yes, yes, it
And
will.
you mentioned that those two next books are retroactively working on this book.
Yes.
How does that work in terms of a reading project, in terms of plotting all this out? You're a bit meticulous when it comes to planning, aren't you? Just just a trifle.
I'm a Virgo. Let's put it that way. I got my charts.
Sure.
um,
Yes.
basic. So it was. I wrote book one. I wrote book two. I wrote book three. Then went back, edited them all, and then went back to book one and really edited. So I've done. There's a lot of this that's just going back and forth. Yes, and meanwhile, as I go, I'm just reading up on the different people, like Lutece and throwing some of those in there, and Bess of Hardwick, and I had to start over here. Why would she trust Bess of Hardwick and let her get away with a lot of stuff that happened later? And it's like, well, okay, this is just who Bess was from the beginning. It's really just kind of I wanted this book was fun because it allowed me to show the seeds of a life that remained remarkably consistent. If you looked at Elizabeth's court when she first came to the throne, and you squinted and looked at her court when she died, when she left it, it was a lot of the same people, or their children, or even their grandchildren. It was she kept the same people around, and in truth, a lot of those people had been around during her father's day and through her sisters and brothers' reign. So you really want to see what all that was. I was fascinated by the intersections and the interplays and how people came together.
And you're saying that it was possible that when you were deep in the weeds of working on book three, it could prompt you to go back to book one and say, well,
Yes,
if I'm going to work out this part of book three, then this part of book one has got to change.
yes, because in book three you're sitting there and you're saying, "Oh, I've always said this," and it's like, "Uh-oh, oh, okay, okay." Now I've said it over here, and let me go back and book one, and now I've done it here.
So do you think, I mean, just a little insider baseball, do you think that's the case with most people who write trilogies?
No, and it was not the case with my Seymour saga, but that was a different protagonist for each of the books, as opposed to if you've got the same person and you're talking about the full life, you really have to smooth things out in between.
Hmm.
Or I think you do. I wanted to.
And you're not troubled by the fact that you can't prove a thing, copper, is what guilty people say. You're not troubled by that at all. No, that's, I feel like I haven't given 8chan enough red meat yet of tearing apart Elizabeth.
I am not troubled. Nothing was proved. Everything was fine. She still almost died, even though
It's true.
she kept to the right line, that I believe she did. She still almost died, which was its own lesson.
What do you think in terms of the immediate wake of Wyatt's rebellion? Was there any key element that saved her? Was it happenstance? Was it simply that Mary didn't turn out to be pregnant? As simple as that. That there is no future for my own lineage, so the whole country knows she's my heir. Or, I mean, something like that would be completely out of Elizabeth's control. You Is it something like that, or was some aspect of her behavior key?
I don't, I actually don't think it was her behavior. Once they had her, there was nothing that she could do. While she was in the tower, there was nothing she could do. But Wyatt exonerated her on the scaffold. So clearly he had been promised freedom, or he had been promised something to implicate her, and he exonerated her on the scaffold. A couple of days later, Nicholas Throckmorton was found innocent despite all of that, and I think that that kind of gave the counselors pause at that point, and it's like, we really shouldn't push this much further. And I think that gave them the courage to stand up to Gardner and the Spanish ambassador and push back a little bit and just say this can't be done. We don't have the proof. We don't have. I mean, I have Effingham in there, basically saying, look at the law. Look at the law. We don't have legally the right to execute her, the right to convict her.
So, is that the former lawyer speaking up and saying that the regard for the law was paramount, or is it that these men were starting to realize that she might be queen and that
A little bit of that too.
going after her blood might be a really bad idea? Uh,
Yep. And then Philip realized that too pretty early on. And it's like, wait a minute, what are my other options? And he's looking around. He's like, Mary Stuart is about to become Queen of France. No, we don't want her. Nobody else. He's looking at like Margaret Douglas. We don't want her. Catherine, no, not her. And he's looking around. He's got no one.
I have to ask, we're running out of time, and I admit, after 2 weeks of doing YouTube talks with people, I love the talks, but I admit I'm getting tired of getting cut off in mid-sentence. But we still have time for me to ask at least one more question. In a book like this, I think it's only natural to ask, were you ever tempted to an extra degree of sympathy for Mary in all this? Usually when people write this story, Mary is the villain. And well, I mean, there's Thomas Seymour, but Mary is usually one of the villains. Were you ever tempted to reduce her to one dimension? You decidedly don't do that, but
Kind of nice to Mary.
it's
Not
nice.
terrible to Mary.
It's
I
nice
was
to
not
be.
really mean. Was I? Was I really mean?
No, no, not at all.
Okay, good.
No, not at all. No, there's definitely a kind of spice whenever you're dealing with Gardner, but not with Mary. No, no. I'm just curious to know you as a writer. Like, for instance, in the course of writing a book like this, how many scenes just get cut and just do not make the final manuscript?
They've all got to lift the heavy burden. If they're not doing a whole bunch of things they have no business being in there, I'll just like throw stuff on. It's like add that in. Um, stuff stuff gets cut. Stuff that is just taking away from the story. It's like, okay, no, don't need to do that. Don't need to dwell on that. Just yeah. So
And was Mary in some of those cut scenes?
not really. There wasn't any room. I give her an enormous amount of credit for not killing Elizabeth and for realizing what Gardner had done after he had done it. Uh, Mary's a tough one. Mary is a really tough one.
Yeah, I
It's
see a biography of her right over your shoulder. But I
that's
remember how I wish I still had Hilda Lewis's book, I Am Mary Tudor. Well, I so wish I had a copy of that novel. I did once upon a time. I
I
still think that it is probably the most energetic attempt to humanize Mary. It's one of the most miserable people, one of the most miserable historical figures. Just, ugh, just never a ray of sunlight, never at all a ray of sunlight.
Poor thing. She was just stuff. That poor thing. She had her moment. She had that one moment, and I gave her her moment at the end of The Boy King, the triumph.
Right. She had her one moment.
But
Even her harshest critics say that was Tudor courage. That
yeah.
took Tudor courage. All the rest of it, oh my God, it's just
And just as when she went to rally the troops with Riot's Rebellion, that took Tudor courage, and there were a few things that Elizabeth modeled her own actions on. Um, that was one of them. How Mary went out among her troops, and how Mary chose the "This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes."
yes, you repeat that. You have them, you have her repeat that line very tellingly at the end. Uh,
Yeah.
it's at that moment at the very end of the book that you realize how closely she was paying attention when she heard it the first time. Uh,
Yep.
but we don't want to open up another can of worms. We don't want to end in mid-sentence. I want to stress this is a very well put together novel, a very enjoyable, engrossing novel. You should all tootle on over to Amazon and buy a copy. And of course, also important, leave a review. Amazon, Goodreads, that's all important. So there we go. We did not give Reddit the red meat they wanted. Apparently, Elizabeth is innocent. Mm. I'll have better luck next time, I suppose. But anyway, thank you. Thank you for the
And you.
conversation. Uh, we'll wrap this up for now, but we'll be back.
So thank you so much.